I mean, first I would say there's actually no relation. Of course, the crisis in Venezuela is an expression of the crisis of capitalism worldwide. And it's a particular expression, it's a more grave expression of the crisis of capitalism worldwide, but it is nevertheless part of the crisis, of the capitalist crisis. If I had to guess, and I'm sure this is a good guess, the non-capitalist forms of the economy are way below 1%. That doesn't mean, and then there's the whole question about state property. There are initiatives that are state property, but the state property is not necessarily, and is generally not the case in the Venezuelan state, socialist initiative. So it's a state property, like in, say, Spanish state Renfe. I think the train system is a state system. That doesn't mean that the state system of trains is socialist in Spain, the Spanish state. So we have to make that clarification. What is a state property is not necessarily socialist, is not necessarily in the socialist realm. So what I consider to be socialist, kind of like a germ of socialism, or like a shoot of socialism, would be the communes, and those are way below 1% of the economy. I mean, probably 0.00 something. But about the crisis, it's like going back to the situation of the crisis in Venezuela. Okay, there are several factors. One of the factors is the big factor is the crisis of capitalism, but then the way that the crisis affects Venezuela begins not with a drop of oil, which is around the prices of oil, which is around 2014, but it begins 2 years earlier, around 2012, and it begins because Venezuela loses its capacity to indebt itself. And thus Venezuela loses its capacity to offer subsidized dollars for the importations of goods. So 2012 is when the crisis really hits Venezuela. There's often a discourse that the crisis hits when the prices of oil drop, but that is false. So 2012, when Venezuela loses the capacity to indebt itself, then 2014, the prices of oil really do drop. That adds that makes the problem that much more grave. And when the prices of oil drop, for instance, amongst many other things, there's when the whole crisis begins, and then when the prices of oil drop, a lot of the production of oil in the Orinoco belt is actually not, which is the big project of exploitation of oil to the south of the country, which is a big Chavista project where it's like the biggest reserve of oil in the world, but it's heavy oil. So there was a big investment done there through Chavez's life to exploit petroleum there, but it's very expensive to exploit that petroleum. So when the crisis hits, not only is there no money to invest in infrastructure to maintain the exploitation, but that exploitation also becomes not efficient. That kind of exploitation becomes inefficient because of the cost of the extraction of oil. That means that there's a reduction in investment in infrastructure, which simultaneously means that the production of oil in about 5 years has dropped to half of what it was. That is another problem that we see here. So it's a multifaceted crisis in the context of capitalism, of a peripheric economy that has not been able to reshape itself. It has not been able to come out of the logic of capitalist rentism. Venezuela, it should be understood that Venezuela since the 30s, but especially since the 50s, is an economy that is 90% and above dependent on oil exportations. So this is not a Chavista-built problem. It is true that during the Bolivarian process, we have not been able to get out of the logic of rentism, but it is a structural logic and a historical logic and it has hit us very hard. And going back to the communes, I believe that only through the communes will we be able to get out of this tragic, really, logic of peripheric capitalism and its rentist quality or character, rather, in Venezuela. Some structural adjustments can fix some problems temporarily, but those problems that exist in our society are very, very grave, very serious, and only radical change will get us out of the current crisis. I believe that very much so. And also, it's not just a belief; it's an experience. I mean, it's a direct experience. I do not live in a territory that's actually organized in a commune, but I do work together. I do know two communes that work very well, and I work together with them, and I know that it's the only way to get out of the current situation.